no one dared to reveal what he said in these recordings. For decades, they remained hidden away, as though the world were not yet ready to hear them. When Edgar Cayce spoke, his voice seemed to come from another plane, as though he were accessing a place somewhere between life and death. In one of his most enigmatic readings, Cayce described in detail what happens to the soul after its final breath. Most surprisingly, many of those revelations were recorded on audio but were never released to the public. The reason was that their content was considered far too disturbing by the standards of the time. He spoke about lights, encounters, spiritual choices, and a kind of evaluation that every soul must face. For Cayce, death was not an end but the beginning of a profound and revealing journey, a journey that, according to him, all of us will eventually make. What he saw along that path frightened many people, but it may set you free. While some people saw only a body resting in a trance, he was traveling through dimensions where time did not exist. During one of those journeys, he revealed that after death, the soul does not go directly to heaven or hell, but passes through a kind of chamber of consciousness where it reviews its entire life. According to Cayce, there is no external judgment, only the soul standing before its own truth. He said this creates such a profound impact that it can be considered the first step of true awakening. After discovering these recordings, many researchers hesitated to make them public, not because they doubted their authenticity, but because they feared how deeply they could shake traditional beliefs. If this resonates with something you feel within yourself, consider subscribing and liking this video. Perhaps you, too, are ready to remember what you have always known. The voice on the tapes is gentle, measured, and yet firm. He speaks like someone who is watching, like someone who has already been there. In one of those sessions, Cayce described the soul passing through fields of light, meeting spiritual guides, and being reunited with people it had loved during life. He said there is no loneliness on the other side, only learning and reunion. According to him, the shock comes when we realize how much we influence the lives of others through gestures we do not even remember. For him, every thought carries a vibration, and those vibrations shape the journey after death. It is not great and spectacular deeds that define our path, but our most intimate intentions, those known only to the heart. These recordings reveal that we are constantly creating our next reality, even now as we watch this video. In another little-known revelation, Cayce said that some souls become trapped in intermediate planes, not as punishment but through an unconscious choice. They do not accept that they have died. Bound by attachment, fear, or the desire to maintain control, they remain close to the material world, sometimes trying to communicate and at other times wandering in confusion. Cayce called this a transitional state, but he stated that no soul is lost forever. Every soul, without exception, will eventually be guided toward the light, sooner or later. What determines how long this takes is our willingness to let go, forgive, and trust. Upon hearing this, many people report feeling chills, not from fear but from recognition, as though something deep within them were whispering, "This is true." And this is where everything begins to make sense. Cayce said that life on earth is like a school and that death is a graduation. Every lesson that is not learned is repeated in future incarnations, not as a punishment but as an opportunity for growth. For him, the soul chooses its challenges even before birth, and when it returns to the spiritual plane, it reviews every choice with complete clarity. He said there are guides who help us understand, but the decision to continue or to reincarnate always comes from us. This revolutionary vision frightened many religious leaders. After all, it placed responsibility in our own hands. But for those seeking meaning, it was a relief. We are not victims of destiny, we are co-creators of our eternal path. During his readings, Cayce frequently described what he called the plane between worlds, a kind of dimension where the soul rests, reflects, and prepares itself. There, he said, there is no pain or fear, but there is consciousness. It is like waking from a long dream and realizing everything that truly matters. In that space, according to him, we meet not only those we loved, but also those with whom we have unresolved emotional matters. We are often invited to speak with those souls through experiences that Cayce compared to healing encounters. Most remarkably, he claimed that these experiences profoundly influence how we choose our next life. Nothing happens by chance, and everything is interconnected in a way that our human eyes are still unable to understand completely. These revelations caused discomfort because they presented a spirituality without dogma, based on inner experiences rather than external rules. Cayce never spoke of eternal punishment but of natural consequences. According to him, suffering does not come from outside us but from within, from what we have failed to heal, understand, or accept. This is why he insisted so strongly on the importance of self-knowledge and compassion. He said, "Know yourself, and you will know God." For Cayce, God was not distant but lived within every soul, waiting to be recognized. When that truth is lived, even death loses its weight. Fear dissolves before the clarity that everything continues, and more than that, continues in a way even more luminous, loving, and real than we could ever imagine. In one recording that was almost destroyed, Cayce described a deeply moving moment. He saw a newly departed soul being welcomed by beings of light. They were not angels in the traditional sense, but elevated consciousnesses filled with empathy, receiving the soul with serenity. These beings showed the soul scenes from its life, not to judge it but to teach it. It was like watching a film through the eyes of the spirit while feeling the effect of every gesture and every word. Cayce became emotional during the reading and said it was one of the most beautiful experiences he had ever witnessed. He ended the recording by saying, "If everyone knew what exists on the other side, they would live with more love and die without fear." That simple yet profound sentence summarizes much of what he wanted to teach us. The oldest recordings contain background noise, crackling sounds, and Cayce's slow breathing as he enters a trance. They are almost hypnotic records, and despite the limited quality of the technology available at the time, there is something within them that deeply touches anyone who listens. It is as though, for a few moments, a doorway between worlds opens. Some researchers claim that while listening to these recordings, they sensed a presence and an inexplicable peace. Many also report having intense dreams after hearing them, as though they had been spiritually touched. There is something in those words, and perhaps in the intention behind them, that goes beyond rational understanding. It is as though he were truly calling to us through time, asking us to remember who we are and what we came here to do. That cannot be ignored. According to Cayce, even before we are born, we are already surrounded by a mission. He said that every soul comes with a purpose, a specific task, and that Earth is the place where that purpose is refined. No one is here by mistake. No one is forgotten or irrelevant. Every pain, every joy, and every encounter form part of a greater plan that the soul itself chose to experience. When we leave, we are not judged by how much we accumulated but by how deeply we loved, how much we helped, and how much we awakened the light living within us. This is the essence of Cayce's deepest messages. It is also why many people were afraid to release these recordings, because they do not speak about religion, they speak about truth. And when truth touches the soul, it transforms it. When Cayce described the moment of death, he did not use dark or terrifying words. On the contrary, he spoke of a gentle separation, like a leaf falling and finally reaching the ground. He said that the soul is welcomed with love and that, for a few moments, it feels more alive than ever before. In that instant, everything becomes clear: the lessons, the mistakes, the successes, and the people who crossed our path. Cayce saw this process as an opportunity for healing and reconciliation, and he claimed that many souls cry not from fear but from relief, because they finally remember who they are beyond the flesh and beyond the personality. It was a vision of death as a return rather than an ending, a truth that, according to him, is engraved in the heart of every human being but forgotten because of the noise of the world. In one of his most confidential readings, Cayce spoke about souls that resist the journey after death. Because of fear, attachment, or guilt, many remain connected to places, objects, or people. These are the so-called wandering spirits, which do not know that they have already departed or refuse to accept it. He said these beings are not evil, only confused, and that the greatest act of help we can offer them is silent prayer and unconditional love. Simply remembering them with affection and wishing them light already helps these souls find their path. For Cayce, everything vibrates and everything communicates, and even our thoughts have the power to reach dimensions beyond matter. When you think lovingly about someone who has departed, that energy is real, it is felt, and it may be the missing key that allows that soul to be released. Cayce also stated that when we return to the spiritual plane, we pass through what he called schools of the soul. These are places of learning where we review our mistakes without guilt and plan our next steps together with spiritual guides. In those schools, he said, there is a kind of living library, records where every life is written, not in words but in vibrations. This was directly connected to the so-called Akashic records. Cayce said he accessed these records during his readings, as though opening an invisible book about each soul. Within them were the reasons behind suffering, connections with other lives, and unrealized potential. According to him, all of this was available to anyone who searched with sincerity and humility. Knowledge is never denied to those who seek it with their hearts. Most moving of all, however, was the way Cayce spoke about reunions after death. According to him, no one is lost forever. Families of souls come together again in cycles of learning and love, sometimes as parents and children, sometimes as friends, and even as strangers who briefly cross our path to fulfill small missions. He said nothing is random. That look that touches us for no apparent reason, that unexpected help, and even deep pain may all be reunions of souls working together on levels that our conscious minds cannot reach. Knowing this changes everything. It changes how we deal with suffering, longing, and fear. If we understand that the soul continues, then we also understand that love is never lost. It merely changes its form. Many people who heard these recordings for the first time reported something unusual. It was not merely Cayce's voice or the words he spoke, it was the feeling of standing before something ancient and essential, something that had always been there but that we had forgotten. It was a silent reminder that we are more than flesh, more than a name, and more than a personal history. We are consciousness, and that consciousness does not die. It merely transforms, like water changing its state while never ceasing to be water. Cayce wanted to remind us of this, not as a doctrine but as an awakening. Perhaps that is why so much fear surrounded his words. When we awaken, we become free, and free people can no longer be controlled by fear. Among the most enigmatic recordings is one in which Cayce appears to speak with someone on the other side. His voice changes subtly, as though he were receiving instructions. He then describes a soul that, after dying, refused to follow the spiritual guides and chose instead to wander through familiar places, visiting its former home and watching its loved ones. Over time, however, it began to realize that its presence caused sadness and confusion. Only then, in a moment of spiritual clarity, did it accept the invitation to follow the light. Cayce emphasized that death does not take away our free will. We continue making choices even on the other side, and those choices shape our spiritual experience with the same force with which they shaped our earthly life. This can be frightening, but it is also liberating because it means that it is never too late to awaken and choose the path of light. Another astonishing revelation came when Cayce stated that there are moments when the worlds touch. He said that certain states of consciousness, such as profound grief, sincere meditation, or even vivid dreams, allow brief encounters with the spiritual plane. On these occasions, it may be possible to feel a presence, hear a phrase, or even receive guidance that changes the direction of a life. According to him, these experiences are not hallucinations. They are real. They are open windows between worlds, permitted when the heart is open enough to receive them. He told stories of people who, after a painful loss, reported feeling touches, smelling familiar fragrances, or hearing gentle voices. He confirmed, yes, those signs are real. They are subtle ways of saying, I am still here. You have never been alone. In another reading, Cayce revealed something that surprised even his closest followers. Preparation for death begins long before the body shows any signs. He said that on deep spiritual levels, the soul begins to detach, prepare itself, and organize its final lessons. This is why many elderly or sick people experience vivid dreams, sudden memories, and intense intuitions. It is as though the soul were reviewing its journey and gathering the final pieces before departure. He recommended that this process be respected and received with tenderness, that people listen to these stories and validate these visions because for the soul, this stage is as sacred as birth. According to Cayce, helping someone die peacefully is one of the noblest acts a human being can perform. One of the most touching passages in the recording speaks about the exact moment of transition. Cayce describes the soul gently rising and leaving the body as though stepping out of tight clothing. He said some souls feel immediate joy, while others experience confusion, especially if they died suddenly. But all of them, without exception, are received by presences of light. These presences do not force or demand anything, they simply wait with love. When the soul feels ready, it follows them. He compared this moment to awakening from a long dream in which everything finally makes sense. For those who remain behind, there is pain, but for the one who has departed, there is freedom, a freedom so intense that human words cannot describe it. Only those who listen to these recordings with an open heart can grasp their depth. Cayce also warned that not everything coming from the other side should be followed blindly. He spoke about spiritual discernment. Not every voice is light, and not every sensation is truth. For this reason, he always recommended aligning the heart with compassion and inner truth before opening channels of spiritual communication. For him, the best filter was love. If something causes fear, guilt, or confusion, it should be questioned. But if it brings peace, clarity, and purpose, it deserves attention. Cayce did not want to create dependence on spiritual phenomena. He wanted to teach every person how to connect with their own soul. Perhaps this is the greatest secret hidden within his recordings. True spirituality is not outside us, it is within us. Listening to your own soul is ultimately the greatest revelation you can receive in this life. With every new session, Cayce went deeper. In one rare reading, he mentioned that some souls choose to reincarnate almost immediately, while others prefer to remain in the subtle planes for a long time, observing and learning until they feel called to return. There is no fixed rule, every journey is unique. He said that sometimes a soul returns out of love to help someone, fulfill a promise, or heal a cycle. At other times, it returns to face an old fear or transform a failure into wisdom. But there is always a greater purpose guiding everything. Cayce believed that understanding this changes our relationship with life and death. When we understand that we will return and that nothing is wasted, we begin living with greater presence, compassion, and courage. One subject that was almost never discussed in the public readings is Cayce's belief that our emotions have a direct effect on the state of the soul after death. He said that hatred, fear, and resentment create densities that make the journey more difficult, while forgiveness, gratitude, and love open pathways of light. This was not a metaphor. To him, it was a spiritual law as real as gravity. He warned, forgive now. Love now. Do not carry that weight with you. He insisted that no one needed to be perfect, only sincere in the effort to improve. Every attempt, no matter how small it may seem, creates an echo in the spiritual plane, and that echo becomes light, direction, and healing. Knowing this makes us responsible, but it also sets us free because it shows us that every thought counts and every choice matters. At another extraordinary moment, Cayce spoke about children who leave this world early. Many grieving parents sought his readings, and he explained that some souls come for only a short period to fulfill a specific mission, such as awakening love, uniting families, or inspiring change. They are evolved souls that do not require a long life to fulfill their role. Cayce said that these children quickly return to the spiritual plane and often become guides for those they left behind, not as traditional angels but as subtle presences that influence thoughts, dreams, and decisions. This revelation brought comfort and at the same time, a new responsibility, to honor that soul by living with greater purpose and light, because deep down, separation is only apparent. The connection always continues. A little-known aspect of the recordings appears when Cayce explains that evolution continues even in the higher planes. The soul never stops growing. It continues studying, helping, and serving. He said there are spiritual masters who coordinate projects of planetary healing, souls that work with the energy of human emotions, and others that assist in preparing new incarnations. According to him, the spiritual plane is active, dynamic, and full of movement. It is not an eternal rest but a continuation of the journey on another frequency. Knowing this changed the way his listeners viewed death, not as a final rest but as a new beginning, a stage of even deeper learning in which love expands, consciousness grows, and the soul discovers new ways to serve the light. Cayce ended many of his sessions with a prayer, not a traditional prayer but a sincere call to remember our origin. He would say, "May we remember who we are and live according to that truth." This is what resonates between the lines of his recordings. He did not want to establish a new religion or impose a single path. He simply wanted every human being to reconnect with the divine spark within, because he knew that once we awaken, nothing can imprison us any longer, neither fear, guilt, nor death itself. That was the essence of his visions, and perhaps this is why so many people tried to silence his voice. An awakened soul is like a light shining in the darkness. It causes discomfort, but it also guides. Above all, Cayce was a guide, a messenger of a truth that can no longer be hidden. Over the decades, many of these recordings were rediscovered by researchers, spiritualists, and seekers throughout the world. The more they are heard, the more clearly we realize that they are not merely accounts of the afterlife. They are mirrors that show who we are, where we went wrong, where we loved, and where we are going. The power of Cayce's words lies precisely in the simplicity with which he translates the invisible. He does not need to persuade anyone. He simply describes what he sees, and that description resonates because deep down, we already know. It is as though a forgotten part of us whispers, "Yes, that is how it is." That memory awakens something transformative. When we remember that we are eternal souls, life changes color. Time ceases to be an enemy, and death ceases to be a threat. Everything takes on new meaning. Among the most memorable passages is a moment when Cayce says that when we die, we do not take our fears, possessions, or titles with us. We take only what we have loved. We take our experiences, our lessons, and the way we touched the lives of others. He repeatedly said that our true legacy is spiritual and that our souls are shaped by silent choices, invisible gestures, and thoughts that no one else sees. Every one of these choices leaves a mark on the fabric of the universe. He said, "Nothing done with love is ever lost." That simple sentence became a mantra for many people who found comfort in his words because it restores meaning to pain, transforms loss into lessons, and invites us to live more truthfully, even in silence. Cayce spoke very little about punishment and a great deal about consequences. For him, suffering was not a divine decree but a reflection of our own decisions. If there is pain, it is because there is something to understand, and if something repeats itself, it is because we have not yet learned the lesson. But there is never condemnation, there is always the possibility of change. This deeply compassionate outlook contrasted sharply with the religious teachings of his time. Perhaps this is why so many resisted making his words public, because Cayce did not promise external salvation. He directed people inward. He said that every person carries within themselves the key to escaping suffering, and that this key is called consciousness. When we awaken to who we truly are, guilt dissolves, fear loses its strength, and the journey begins to make sense again. In a reading that remained hidden for years, Cayce described what he called the passage through the veil, a delicate stage in which the soul still feels traces of the material world but begins to realize that it is on another plane. It is a moment of confusion for many, but also of reunion. He spoke of gentle voices calling the soul by name, of lights that do not blind but instead provide warmth, and of a feeling of complete welcome. He said this moment can last for seconds or days depending on a person's level of consciousness. This is why it is so important to cultivate spirituality during life, not as an obligation but as preparation. The person who lives in harmony with the soul passes through the veil lightly and finds not strangeness on the other side but familiarity, as though returning home. There is also a recording in which Cayce, almost in tears, says that humanity's greatest mistake is forgetting that it is made of souls. He said the suffering of the world comes from the illusion of separation. We believe we are alone, isolated, and disconnected from the source, and this is why we feel fear, envy, guilt, and despair. According to him, all of this dissolves the instant the soul recognizes itself as part of the whole. He explained that on the spiritual plane, this awareness is natural. There is no separation between beings, ideas, or worlds. Everything vibrates in unity. The challenge of living on Earth is precisely to remember this, even when facing pain and even while living in the material world. When we are able to keep that memory alive, we can bring heaven to earth, and that, he said, is the true purpose. In one of his final readings on the subject, Cayce warned that forgetting the soul creates more than suffering, it creates repetition. He said that many souls incarnate repeatedly into the same situations and patterns because they refuse to look within themselves, because they are afraid of what they may find. But he emphasized that self-knowledge is the only true path to liberation. It is not enough to want to escape pain. We must understand what it is trying to teach us. He said that on the other side, the soul is not punished for its mistakes but invited to review them with love. This review is transformative. Seeing the effect of our actions and feeling what we caused others without the ability to defend ourselves is a process that changes everything. This is why, according to Cayce, love is always the best preparation for death, because it is already a rehearsal for what we will experience there. Cayce also spoke about interrupted spiritual missions. He said that when someone dies tragically or prematurely, the soul may choose to resume that mission in another incarnation, with different faces and in another time, but with the same essence. For him, there is no final failure, only pauses, changes of direction, and new opportunities. He stated that nothing is wasted. A short life, a painful experience, or a serious mistake can all be transformed into light when there is sincere repentance and a desire to grow. These words brought comfort to those living with guilt or grief because they showed that the story of the soul is greater than any isolated moment. No matter how dark things may appear, there is always a new dawn and always a path leading back to love. Among the most symbolic passages is a phrase Cayce repeated frequently: death is merely closing the eyes to this world and opening them to another. It is that simple, without drama or terror, merely a change of perspective. He said that when souls open their eyes on the spiritual plane, many of them cry, not from sadness but because of beauty, reunion, and relief, because everything makes sense and everything is connected. He said that those who prepare themselves during life experience less shock because they already know the terrain. They have already spiritually walked through those landscapes. They have meditated, forgiven, and loved, and this creates a bridge, a vibration that resonates on the other side and makes the transition easier. For Cayce, living well was the best preparation for dying well, and dying well was simply another name for continuing to live. Once, someone asked him, "How can I know whether I am ready to leave?" Cayce replied, "You are ready when you live truthfully and love without fear." He was not speaking about accumulating spiritual accomplishments or performing complex mystical practices. He was speaking about authenticity, presence, and consciousness. According to him, living at peace with yourself is the greatest sign that you are aligned with your essence. When this alignment occurs, death ceases to be a threat and becomes a natural stage, a return home. Age, physical condition, and religion do not matter. What matters is the frequency at which we vibrate. Cayce said love is the highest frequency, the only one capable of crossing worlds, healing wounds, and illuminating paths. It is the only thing that remains because it is the only truth. This is why so many people are still afraid of these recordings even today, because they speak directly to the soul and do not allow excuses or the shifting of responsibility. They place a mirror before us and say, "Look, you are eternal." As liberating as that truth may be, it demands courage to review, release, and change. Cayce was never a man of dogma. He was a man of service, truth, and humility. That is what his messages still carry, a calling, an invitation to remember, awaken, and love, not like someone waiting for a miracle from outside, but like someone recognizing that the miracle already lives within. Ultimately, that is what we are, miracles in the form of souls, and no death can extinguish that. When we listen carefully to these recordings, something changes within us, not merely because of the beauty of the words but because of the frequency with which they were spoken. Cayce did not speak to impress or convince. He spoke because he saw. Someone who truly sees does not need to exaggerate, they simply share. Perhaps that is what makes his messages so powerful even today, their honesty. He did not promise heaven or threaten people with hell. He simply described what he saw: light, paths, choices, encounters, and new beginnings. He was like someone returning from a long journey and calmly describing what he found. Every description was a key, a memory, and a map. For many people, his words were their first true contact with authentic spirituality, the kind that does not separate but unites, that does not oppress but liberates. Many of those who listened to Cayce's recordings reported profound transformations. Some began living more lightly, while others started forgiving old wounds. Some lost their fear of death, and others felt for the first time that life had a purpose. For Cayce, purpose was not something distant or unreachable. It was simple: to grow in consciousness and serve with love. He said every act of kindness, every expression of compassion, and every sincere attempt to understand was already part of the mission. There was no need for great accomplishments. Presence and genuine intention were enough. This is something anyone can cultivate right now, and it is why his messages touch people so deeply. They do not ask us to be perfect, only to be real. That invitation still resonates today. In one of his most touching phrases, Cayce said, "The soul that loves never dies." With those words, he summarized everything. Love is the thread that sews together every life, every experience, and every reunion. It is the bridge between worlds, the fuel of the soul, and the only thing we truly carry with us. Cayce did not say this as a metaphor. He saw love as a living, tangible, and transformative energy. Whenever he spoke of it, his voice became especially gentle, as though touching something sacred. For him, learning to love was the reason we came here, and dying was merely moving into another room, continuing to study and continuing to serve. What begins in love never ends. Knowing this completely changes how we view death, because we understand that deep down, it does not stop anything, it only continues it. Cayce also spoke about the importance of silence. He said that in the deepest moments of the soul, there is no noise, only listening, and it is in that silence that God speaks. Many people wait for external signs, miracles, or voices from heaven, but according to him, true revelation happens within, in the silence of the mind and the surrender of the heart. This is why he strongly recommended meditation, wordless prayer, and contemplation, because in those moments, we align ourselves with our essence and hear what has always been there. When we listen, we remember again. We remember that we are guided, loved, and welcomed, even on dark days and even amid deep pain. Nothing is out of place. Every stage has a purpose, and in the end, everything always returns to love. Perhaps this is what Cayce most wanted to remind us, that death does not need to be feared, that the soul is never lost, and that love is never in vain. Even decades later, his words continue to serve as beacons for those seeking answers, not because they promise magical solutions but because they direct us inward, to the place where everything begins and where everything will one day return. Listening to Cayce is like hearing an ancient yet familiar voice, a voice that knows us better than we know ourselves and that, with gentleness and firmness, invites us to live more truthfully. Truth liberates, truth heals, and the truth Cayce saw is that we are eternal and that we are here for only a short time, a precious and sacred time filled with opportunities to love. The recordings that so many people feared releasing have now become relics of a wisdom the world is gradually beginning to accept. They no longer belong to the past. They belong to everyone who feels, even without fully understanding, that something more exists, something pulsating behind the veil of the visible world. Cayce left us this legacy not to create followers but to inspire seekers, people willing to question, feel, and transform, people who understand that living is not merely surviving but remembering that we are souls on a journey and that every step and every gesture has meaning. As you hear these words, perhaps you feel a call, not from outside but from within, as though something inside you were saying, "I have always known this." This is why this video exists, to remind you of what your soul has never forgotten. Cayce also said that the times we are living through now are special, that we are in a moment of spiritual turning when many souls are awakening. He said this awakening would not come with great signs but through small awakenings, an unexpected tear, a vivid dream, an inexplicable reunion, and above all, a deep desire to live more truthfully. These are the signs. Do not ignore them. They indicate that the soul is asking for space, that the call has arrived, and that you are not here by chance. You are here because you chose to be here. Everything you have experienced until now, including the pain, was preparation. Preparation for what? To remember, love, serve, and live not as someone who is lost but as an awakened soul on a mission. That mission begins wherever you are right now. There is something profoundly human and divine in the way Cayce gave himself to others. He did not charge for the readings. He asked only for silence, truth, and sincere intention. Perhaps this is the greatest lesson we can take from all of this. True spirituality is simple. It does not require perfection, titles, or dogmas. It requires surrender, listening, and presence. You do not need to change the world, you need only change the way you see it, and from there, everything changes. This is how the soul grows, and this is how light spreads. It is why Cayce's words still vibrate like an ancient whisper refusing to be forgotten, because they are not merely his words, they are ours. They are part of the universal truth living within every one of us, waiting to be remembered and waiting to be lived. If you have come this far, it is because something within you has already awakened. Perhaps it is an ancient echo or a longing for something you have not yet experienced, but it is there, pulsating. Now that you have heard it, you can no longer pretend that you do not know. The soul recognizes the call. Even if the mind attempts to resist, the heart has already understood. Life continues, love continues, and the journey continues. Everything you are, everything you feel, and everything you seek is part of something much greater, something Cayce saw, something he tried to tell us, and something that has now reached you. So take a deep breath, give thanks, and if this message has touched your soul, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Perhaps you are the channel Cayce was waiting for so that his voice could finally resonate within other souls. Thank you for allowing this message to reach you. May it find a home in your heart and become light upon your path. If you wish to continue this journey, subscribe to this channel. Here, stories like this will be told with truth, respect, and depth, just as Cayce would have wanted, because as long as someone is willing to listen, his soul will continue speaking, not through words but through vibration. Perhaps, in the silence, you will realize that he never left. He was simply waiting for you to be ready, and now you are.